Okay, thank you, Megan. So the topic we wanted to cover today was soybean yield benchmarking project. So this is an on-farm research study that we did last year. This really came about from some surveys that were done from 2014 to 2017. So we would have to thank all the farmers who filled those out for us. So what this study showed is they found some gaps between what producers are seeing for yield and what the potential is. And the three big things that came out of that for Nebraska were planting date, seeding rate, and then the use of foliar fungicides and insecticides. So normally if we would want to do an on-farm research project with that, we would maybe tackle one of those at a time. Otherwise we get a really big study with a whole bunch of factors, right? So let's just go through each of those individually and see kind of what we've seen for results of some of those studies before. So the first one is planting date. So no surprise to everyone that earlier planting seems to pay better. So this is from 2008 to 2010, a summary of the studies that were done with our on-farm research network. And you'll see that the late planting date was May 18th, the average early planting date was April 26th, and that earlier planting gave us about a 2.7 bushel per acre yield increase. So there's definitely some positives there to planting early. The next one we want to look at then is the planting population. So planting population, if these are all the studies that we had that compared 90,000, 120, 150, and 180. We had some others that were in different populations. We just use these because then we had some set rates. So if you look at this, you'll notice that we did have some lower yields with the 90, and then it just continued going up. However, if you look at that yield rise, if you looked at the price of seed, you know that's not enough to cover that increase in seed cost. So a lot of times when you run the economics on these, the 120 ends up coming out ahead for total cost there. The next thing that we want to look at is fungicide and insecticide applications. So these are some results from our soybean management field days. So this is research that's been conducted across the state of Nebraska. So in 2015, we had some plots looking at a R3, a pod set application of a fungicide and insecticide versus no treatment. So that year, you'll notice the one site in Wakefield is bolded. So that was the one site that did have a statistical yield improvement for the fungicide and insecticide. The average, there's some differences there, but nothing statistical. Next one then in 2016, some different sites. These sites move every year across the state. So two of the four sites had an average statistical increase for using the insecticide and fungicide. And then the average of all four sites together was statistically significant. So there's definitely some trends in each one of these that there may be some yield bumps there. So then what we did what we always tell people not to do, right? We always say just use one study looking at one factor. Well, we throw multiple things in the same study. So we compared a baseline practice versus an improved. The advantage of this, it really simplified it for the farmer. On the downside, we can't tell you which one of these factors was the one that maybe gave us the yield improvement. So the baseline practice we had was a mid-May or later planting date. We had 160,000 seeds per acre we were shooting for, and then no foliar fungicide and insecticide, unless, if we had thistle caterpillar, we had to apply insecticide in that case. Our improved practice was late April versus an early May planting date, 130,000 seeds per acre, and then foliar fungicide and insecticide planned at R3. So here we have a picture from one of the sites. One of the things that we ran into last year was you could get stuff planted in early, and then you couldn't get in for a while. So this is one of the advantages of maybe trying to go for a little bit earlier planting date. So we're going to look at two of the four studies that we had last year in a little more detail. So this was one that was done in Cumming County. So the baseline was planted on May 16th. The improved was on May 6th. Now, if you look at the seeding rate, you'll say, well, that's not what we planned, right? Well, that's on farm research. Sometimes things happen, right? We forget, we do whatever. So both plots were planted at 150,000 seeds per acre. And then we did have the no fungicide and insecticide versus a fungicide and insecticide that was applied on July 24th. Cumming County was actually fairly dry during the summer. So you'll notice during July and first part of August, they were actually below normal. And then they did catch some rains and catch up the rest of the year. So when we look at the results of this one, the first thing, stand count kind of stands out. we said we planted the same, right? So we wouldn't expect a difference, but we actually did have a statistical difference with the late planted having a higher stand count compared to the improved. I can't tell you why that happened. And, just sometimes things happen, right? So next, if we look at yield, we had a 66 bushel average for the baseline and a 73 bushel average for the improved. So that was statistical. And then finally, if we look at the marginal net return, so that's what we should be looking at, right, is what we making money. No statistical difference there. Things were bouncing around a little bit, so it's close, right? If we would have used a 85% confidence, we would actually say that was statistical. Okay, the next study then we have is down in Richardson County. So this one, you'll notice a big difference in planting date there, right? So rain, weather factors definitely got us in this one. So our improved was planted on April 20th. Our baseline was on June 1st. So here we did have the 160 versus the 130, and then the fungicide and insecticide application as planned. Now, one thing on this one, we did have a lot of thistle caterpillars last year, so both sites, both treatments received an insecticide application on June 20th. Got to control the insects if you have to, okay? Well above normal rainfall, total of 50 inches for the year. So let's look at the results from that one. I guess before that, though, I forgot. This one was interesting. We were doing aerial photography of all these sites. And one of the things we always say about early planting, right, is that increases our chances for SDS in some fields. So this is a case where it actually did pop up a little bit. So if we look closely at that September 13th, you can see a little bit on the RGB, but if you focus in on the NDVI imagery, you'll notice there that we have some lower NDVIs, and that matched up when they did some ground truthing with where the examples of more SDS were present in that field. And you can see exactly to the line how it stops with the baseline that was planted later in the year. So sometimes that might affect our yields. In this case, though, wasn't that big of a factor overall. So if we look at our early season stand counts, we do have the difference like we would expect with that planting rate difference. The yield then, 71 bushels for the baseline, 83 bushels for the improved. So even with that SDS pressure, we still there gained 12 bushels. So that's a pretty good improvement there. And then the marginal net return, we did have a difference there as well. So 591 versus 504. So pretty good return to doing those earlier treatments in this situation. So when we look at all four sites overall in 2019, the average yield advantage was 8 bushels. Now, anything like this, it's always good to do multiple years because we did have several sites where we had that month and a week difference in planting date, which maybe some years we wouldn't see that big of a difference. So like anything, it's always good to try this again. The marginal net return advantage, those improved treatments was 45.94 an acre. So at the end of the day, we want to help you guys make money. So this is definitely something we should look at. So given that we're doing this again in 2020, so we do have opportunities for research in Eastern Nebraska. Some of the basics, overall, we want you to plant a soybean variety with seed treatments. So both treatments will use that same variety. Same thing as last year, the improved is going to be earlier planting, lower population, and then fungicide and insecticide application at R3 versus the later planting, higher population, and no fungicide and insecticide. For the data collection side, on the grower side, really all we need from you is the yield monitor data or Waywagon data, and then we just need to have you collect some seed samples at harvest. A lot of the other things we will help you out with. So we will help you with the yield analysis. We'll help you with the soil testing, stand counts, and then also seed quality. We'll get that analyzed. And in addition, we'll also have the availability of aerial imagery as well. So we'll help you out, try to help you get this study done. So here's the example of the plot layout for this. So we need a minimum of 4 replications. We're doing a paired comparison here, so the baseline versus the improved. So that helps you out a little bit for spraying, right? So some of this depends on, you have to kind of figure out what your boom width for your sprayer, what your planter width, harvest width is, and then we can work out how wide those strips need to be. In addition to that, we had some growers comment, well, you know, what actually gave us the yield benefit here? So one thing we did want to make available this year was an additional study. So it'd basically be an additional, some land to the side of this original study where we could look at just the fungicide and insecticide at R3. So whether you plant the rest of the field early or late, the only real change that would be on the rest of the field would be the fungicide and insecticide application. So that's totally optional. Just if you want to do that, if you've got enough room in the field to do that, that would be great to have some extra data for us to look at. So we're looking for 20 growers to participate in 2020. The reason we have 20 is we have some monetary compensation. We can help you out to cover some of those costs, some of the time that you're doing to do this study. So we have enough for 20 people, so we still have some room. So if you're really, if you're interested in this, please give us a call or email one of us or contact your local extension educator and they'll get you in contact with the right person. So the reason we're showing this map, these are the areas that are eligible for this. So it's limited to these certain geographic regions in the state because those are the areas they wanted to concentrate on that these 3 practices would work. So that does limit us a little bit. So, quite a few counties there though that we do have this opportunity available to. So I would like to thank some of the following. So the funding for this project is coming from the North Central Soybean Research Program in addition to the Nebraska Soybean Checkoff. And then I also would like to thank Patricio Grassini. He was got this benchmarking soybean production systems in the North Central US, got all that research really started and then is helping us with this one as well. So hopefully that was a helpful presentation. I guess, before we go to Slido, I guess we would ask, are there any questions?
Aaron, there is one question from Gary Zubiek about just a clarification on the early planting date, whether it was April 16th or May 16th.
It was actually May 16th versus May 6th, so that's not a large difference there. Typically we'd like to see a little bit more, but just the way the weather was, the first time he could get in was on May 6th and then came back on May 16th. So yeah, only a 10-day difference there, and we still had some yield differences. So.
And there is a question, so what is the recommended time between early and late planting?
They would like to see 3 weeks, but I think, that's always, we can always work with that. It's always weather kind of dictates things, right? So if you could do that, I know the baseline, they want at least mid-May, no earlier than that. So it might depend a little bit on when you get your first one planted. So I see Gary has a question of eastern part of York can participate. Let's go back to that map here quick, Gary. We're not into York, unfortunately.
Eastern part of Seward, I think, is the end. Yep.
Yeah. Do you want to explain a little more about why they picked those, Laura?
Yeah, so as they did that survey, they targeted different areas that had more similar climate and soil combined. So this eastern part of the state, of course, you have to draw some lines at some point, but this eastern part of the state would typically have a little more similar soils and rainfall and temperatures than other portions of the state. So this area they felt would be representative. If we did studies within this area, we feel that it would be able to be extrapolated to other areas within this same geography. And within different portions of the state, different factors, we're looking at planting date, seeding rate, and then the fungicide and insecticide applications. In other areas of the state, other factors might have come up as most important in that survey. So those maybe would want to look at some different combined factors in their studies. So we're just kind of tackling this one area and one issue first.
They are doing similar studies in other states. Once again, they might be looking at different factors, like Laura said, but so they are going to then eventually pool all that data to kind of get some analysis done. We do have supplemental resources. So if you go to the cropwatch.unl /streaming-farm-research website, which we put up in the chat, you can download the results of this year's study. So all 4 of the sites you can look at the more detailed analysis. We also have the protocol for this year, as well as that 3-year study of looking at the farmer surveys, the entire report on that as well.
So with that, we want to thank Aaron for being able to talk about this subject today. If there's more questions, please put them in the chat. We will hang around for a few more minutes so you can finish up your Slido and then also download the links if you need them. And hopefully we'll see you guys next week.